Hi, welcome to the Also Called podcast, where we're asking hard questions about our place in this hectic world.
Join us as we dig into the truth about who God is, possibly discovering that we are also called.
Okay, Katie, so what do you want to talk about her response to Jesus?
This is my favorite part of the story that we get to learn from Mary continued on the road to Emmaus. So the way that her story progresses is very natural. It's very organic. It's relevant. So she walked along the road, still speaking to the stranger. And then again, according to culture and history at that time, they invited Jesus in as a stranger, not knowing it was Jesus, invited this stranger in who had been speaking scripture, clearly a teacher of some sort. He was very learned and taught on scripture. And they invited him in for dinner because that was tradition. So they invited him in. And that is a sign of respect. And it's a sign that they really wanted more time with him, in that he had time to speak over dinner. And during the dinner time is when everything changed. She responded before with a little lack of understanding, not knowing exactly what was being told to her, but recognizing scripture. And then at dinner, they asked Jesus to break bread and bless their meal. In that moment, her eyes were revealed. She was able to see who he was in all of his beautiful glory. And so I put myself into that moment and I think, goodness, can you imagine realizing that you have been talking to Jesus this whole time? Jesus, who you just witnessed be crucified in the most horrific murder, and then not there in his tomb, and to see firsthand that it was him. I imagine the reassurance and the joy and the just overwhelming sense of excitement to tell everyone. And that's exactly what Mary's response was. Mary could hardly contain herself. Remember, they had been heading home, sad, alone, desperate, kind of wondering what the next step was. And now they knew. They knew the truth had been revealed. Their eyes had seen the truth. Their very own eyes had told them and seen him. In that, they then turned, and immediately their response was to tell others, to tell and share the good news. And goodness, if we could all do that, if we could all be that excited to know Jesus personally, to then turn and run and tell others, to tell everyone, that was her response. And shouldn't it be ours? We often turn inward in our sadness, but turn outward in our excitement. And that's exactly what we saw Mary do there.
That's so good. And I love that, again, she could have sat in the, what an idiot, I didn't see it, or, all the other things, but instead she chose to rejoice and she chose to accept. She chose to believe what her eyes were seeing. So, in that, what did you learn about God through Mary's story?
Mary's story to me was a reminder to know and be in constant connection with Jesus, to spend time communicating with him, but also to trust that we have to have an element of understanding that we cannot see the full picture. We cannot always know what the next step forward is. And even in our humanness, we cannot thwart God's plans. We cannot mess it up, because the great part is he has factored in our humanity into his plan. He knows us well enough to know she might need me to walk with her for a little while before I reveal that I'm there. Or she may need to understand that scripture is where she should be turning, not running home to be in the comfort of her home, which is something I could see myself doing. So, in that, I see how God was able to use her humanity and her imperfection in that moment, her imperfect despair, distraction of grief, and doubts about what she had just experienced, to still accomplish the amazing revelation that Jesus was alive. And then he used that excitement, because I love to think about it like this. If Mary saw Jesus and it was revealed that it was Jesus right away, would she have had that time to process the grief? Would she have had that time to then have that overwhelming excitement of going back? I feel like it may have taken some of that joy away if he didn't allow her to process that she was grieving and then reveal it in his perfect timing. And I trust that that was part of her story so that I can relate to her. I can see how God needs to give me that time, and he does graciously give me that time to work through my journey and my spiritual journey, sometimes spiritually cloaking what his plan forward is in order for me to trust him just a little bit more, to grow my faith just a little bit more. And then I share that story. And that's my calling. And that's why I'm here.
I love that. Again, it's that scripture going back to eyes to see and ears to hear. What is it that we're seeing? And I tend to see God like a mirror. We see ourselves for who we truly are, and what we truly need is Him. And then seeing truthfully allows us the opportunity to submit and to change. Why does He do that? And I feel like exactly what we saw Him do on Emmaus. He didn't shame, He didn't degrade. It was an issue of getting us to see who he really is. And I think he's still doing that today. So I love that you picked up on that in your chapter and you really unpacked that to help us see.
Yeah, I pulled out some of
Absolutely.
the quotes from your chapter as far as what we learn about God and what we see. We see Jesus prioritizing time with people over customs, traditions, and more logical routes. He understands how we process because he created us and to work through our emotions. So that's a quote I pulled out from your chapter, and I absolutely loved that.
It really reminds me and keeps me grateful that he again factors in all of those portions of him that was 100% human as well. It was such a unique viewpoint, him being human, knowing what we would need, but also, like you had said, Mia, a reflection up against us. Her natural human response was to grieve and to doubt. And it directly was a stark contrast to this stranger that she didn't know was Jesus at the time, where what did he do? He turned to scripture, but he didn't make her feel bad. He reminded her. And that was a reflection of God's goodness and God's character that he will remind us. And he will remind us that there's the difference between the two of us. The difference between Jesus and Mary on this journey was that she turned to her humanity, her natural instincts, and he said, no, scripture and trust and remember when he has been faithful. And God really does that often with us. And I know he's done it in my life where that reflection up against what we know about God's character shows me ways that I am constantly being refined and sanctified. Those moments where I turn very human and God reminds me, I love you anyways, but trust me. Just trust me, walk with me. And these are some examples of things you can do: prayer, communicate, but also get in your word, get in the scriptures, because that is what Jesus used. It was a tool he used to draw her in and trust him so that she would invite him in to her dinner. And then the revelation happened. It was all a matter of the journey.
I love that you pointed out that she probably would not have been able to process through those things and take those steps if Jesus would have just immediately revealed himself. There was a process she had to go through for her discipleship journey. The way you have described perfectly that healing process, which I think a lot of us have to go through in our own discipleship journey.
Absolutely. Mary was called to follow for her entire experience with Jesus. She was called to follow him. She was called to follow her husband, who was also in ministry. She was called to follow, to trust, and to recognize Jesus. That's what she did for years and years. And when we think about sharing the good news, that's also meaning that we have not figured everything out yet. We are in a journey of discipleship as well. None of us have all the answers, but the good news we can rely on is that Jesus does. And God's not going to just leave us alone to figure it out on our own. That's part of the discipleship journey. And I loved this Road to Emmaus story. And it hit so personally when I was writing because I saw that it was like I love to hike, and every step was a physical expression of movement. through the process. It was a physical representation of what she was going through. It was a dusty, dry, hot road that she was walking along. That's an expression of what she was going through physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And God sometimes uses that journey for us to see how he wants us to process and trust. And that's part of Mary's journey in discipleship, was that she was called to process and trust in spite of all that she was naturally grappling against in her real body and in her real mind, saying, "Wait, what did I just experience?" And Jesus was saying, "No, let's work through this. Let's go."
Is there anything that you didn't cover in her chapter just because we didn't have room and time?
The main part of Mary's chapter that I could not fit into the amount of time we had to discuss was her life as a mom. And as a mother, we know part of her story is she's identified by her children. She is identified by at least one of her children being a disciple. And that's pretty special. So, what was it about her that, as a mom, that would allow her children to then be walking alongside the Son of God? We know that Jesus chose very average people, very relevant people to us, even to this day. He chose the lowest of the low in a lot of circumstances to go through that journey with him. And I feel like I would love to know more about her sons. I would love to know more about their story and what reflection that would have on her story as a mom to get them to that point where they were walking with Jesus.
I think in American culture, we really miss out on multi generational homes. I just think we miss out on so much. So I would love to learn more about, the family dynamic of that too. That would be really interesting. So, Katie, how do you see her story applying to our audience? And what do you want our listeners to take away?
I would love for people to come to the realization that I had during this struggle back and forth of understanding who she was with just such a small bit to work with. But yet there was such a big story there. And that is something that I would love for readers to take away, that even though you may feel like you're just putting your head down and being obedient, you're following, you're moving through that journey, that it's still important and you are still valued. Jesus still finds value. In fact, he lifted these women up, especially Mary. She had what most people would consider a very minimal part of the story of Jesus and his resurrection, but yet it was she and her husband who got to tell the good news. That's pretty powerful. And I feel like that's something we can learn from. That is something that each of us can take away, that our intimacy with Jesus does not have anything to do with a status and our job in this world. We have a story much greater than just being any one thing. That is a powerful story that Jesus wants us to express to others, because we have a story to tell and we have a purpose that goes alongside our discipleship journey with Jesus, and we need to share it, and we need to shout it from the rooftops with anyone in our circles. We may not be able to go back and tell grieving disciples that we saw the Son of God risen. That may not be our story, right? But our story is still just as powerful. We have no idea the generational legacies that will come from us being obedient and moving through with eyes that see him, with a spiritual awakening inside of us, that are not cloaked, that we are constantly diving in the word, even in those moments where we cannot see what's next, that Jesus has a plan for us. And we cannot be too distracted to see him. But even if we are, he's ready to scoop us up and say, "I'm here and I love you."
And I love that he meets us where we are. That's where they were. They were on the road going home disappointed, and that's where he met them. So, can you give us a quick summary about your disciple?
So Mary was never irrelevant to Jesus. Others may have factored her as irrelevant over thousands of years, and just a small portion of her story being in the Bible, but she was never irrelevant. She was never too obscure or too small. In fact, she was used as one of the most powerful voices in the Bible to share the good news about a resurrected Jesus. In that, he chose her to be part of the darkest, lowest, hardest part of his story. And as well, he saw her as important enough to watch him be redeemed and alive and well. And that was an incredible gift to her and her story. It's one that we can all take, that is one that we can all relate to, because we've all been in really dark places. But the light's coming and the resurrection is coming. And in each one of those parts of our stories, high and low, Jesus doesn't make us sit alone and wallow in our misery. If we're looking for him, if we're processing, if we trust him, he will meet us right where we are, and he will write the second half of the story if we are willing and if we recognize him. Recognizing him was Mary's gift. Mary's eyes were unveiled, and she was able to see the Son of God sitting right in front of her. And I believe we can have that moment too in our stories. We have dark moments where we cannot see, but through faith and trust and processing, we can see an unveiled and beautiful Jesus, just like Mary.
So I have learned that God is conversational, and we can talk to him in prayer, and how important it is for us to verbalize the things that we're going through, and also the importance of scripture. But honestly, I got to tell you, my first response isn't to just run out and tell everybody. So through this project, it has definitely been very eye-opening and convicting to to me personally, because I don't do that enough. I am very transparent with the struggles so that I am hopefully an encouragement to other people, but I don't shout the glory of God enough about what it looks like on the other side, or even what it looks like as he's walking with me on that road.
I've learned from your chapter, Katie, that he will meet me where I am. And it's my responsibility to not be distracted and to have eyes to see, because I think he's always willing to give us the eyes. He's always willing to take the scales if we slow down and we give him the time. So thank you so much, Katie, for an amazing chapter and spending this hour with us of helping our readers and our listeners who haven't bought the book yet to know Mary Cleopas. And we just thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you guys so much. It's been an honor and a blessing. I really appreciate it.
So thank you so much for joining us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Mary Cleopas. So if you would, drop us a line in the comments, because this is just a start of the conversation. Or you can always follow us on social media. Our links are in the show notes below. So join us next time as we dive into the women disciples we explore in our book, The Other Disciples, meeting a very well-known but misunderstood woman, Mary of Magdala. And remember, stay curious
and keep seeking.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Also Called provides a space for honest conversations about the truth of who God is, who we are, and the relationships he wants us to have with him, each other, the church, and ourselves. This episode was just the start of the conversation. Be sure to check the show notes for extra resources to go further. You can also find our social media sites to join the discussion. Don't miss our next chat by subscribing to our YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Also Called is part of Bible and Pop Culture, a crowd-funded nonprofit that allows us to provide our content to start great conversations for free. You can help us keep doing this by checking out BibleandPopCulture.com or AlsoCalled.org's Donate Subscribe buttons with a one-time gift, supporting us monthly, or sharing us with someone who might like the conversation. Thank you for being a part, and see you next conversation.